When the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event wiped out the dinosaurs 66 million years ago, it left a massive, deafening silence on planet Earth. For millions of years, giant reptiles had completely dominated the top of the food chain, keeping our tiny rat-like mammalian ancestors hiding in the dirt. But when the dust from the asteroid finally settled, that massive biological ceiling was lifted. It left a vacuum of power, and mammals finally emerged from the shadows to inherit the world. Today, when we think of apex mammalian predators, we picture the perfectly designed, majestic hunters of our modern era. We think of the sleek agility of a cheetah, the coordinated intelligence of a wolf pack, or the raw, calculated power of a grizzly bear. We look at these animals and we see the polished, finished products of evolution. But what we often forget is that evolution doesn't just instantly create perfection. Before it engineered the lions and the wolves, nature went through a very dark, very violent and incredibly experimental phase. It was trying to figure out what a mammalian apex predator should actually look like. And during that experimental phase, it created an absolute nightmare. If we travel back in time to the Oligocene epoch, roughly 30 million years ago, the landscape of North America looked very different than it does today. It was a harsh, transitional world filled with dense, shadowy floodplains and thick forests. And the undisputed tyrant of this landscape wasn't a giant cat, and it wasn't a prehistoric bear. It was a hoofed mammal the size of a rhinoceros, boasting a massive skull that was nearly 3 feet long and equipped with a set of bone-crushing biomechanics that honestly resembled a small T-Rex. Paleontologists officially classified this family of megafauna as Entelodontidae, but history and the people who study their fossilized remains gave them a much darker, much more fitting name. They called them the Hell Pigs. Today, we are decoding the Daeodon, which was the absolute largest and most terrifying of the Hell Pig family. And I promise you, once you understand the sheer brutality of how this biological anomaly lived, hunted, and survived, you are going to be incredibly grateful that evolution eventually decided to erase it from the face of the Earth. Now, to truly understand the nightmare that is the Daeodon, we have to completely throw away our modern understanding of animal biology, because despite the famous nickname, the hell pig was not actually a pig at all, not even close. It was an artiodactyl, which is an even-toed ungulate. If we look at its genetic lineage, the closest living relatives to the hell pig swimming and walking the earth right now are actually hippopotamuses and whales. But physically, if you were to stand face to face with a Daeodon, it didn't look like a hippo. It looked like a monstrous mutated hybrid constructed from the leftover spare parts of completely different animals. Picture this in your mind. This creature stood almost 6 feet tall, right at the shoulder, but it was supported by surprisingly long, very slender legs that ended in cloven hooves. These legs looked like they belonged on a giant prehistoric deer, and they were biomechanically designed for high-speed sprinting across short distances. But atop those slender legs sat a massive, muscle-bound, tank-like torso, and protruding from its back were towering spinal vertebrae that created a massive, fleshy hump over its shoulders, kind of like a modern-day bison. Now, you might be wondering, why did an animal with skinny running legs need such a massive, heavily muscled hump on its back? Well, it was required for one terrifying reason, and that was to support the sheer, crushing weight of its grotesque head. The skull of a full-grown Daeodon was absurdly large, making up almost a third of its entire body length, and jutting out from its cheekbones were these massive, bizarre bony flanges known as zygomatic arches. Now, these bone protrusions weren't just there for decoration or to make the animal look intimidating. In the animal kingdom, form always follows function. Those massive cheekbones acted as biological anchor points for some of the thickest, most powerful jaw muscles ever seen in a terrestrial mammal. Evolution didn't build a sleek, graceful hunter here. It built a living, breathing siege engine. In the brutal environment of the Oligocene, survival was an everyday war. Starvation was a constant, looming threat for massive carnivores. The Daeodon didn't have the luxury of razor-sharp retractable claws to quietly take down prey like a modern tiger. Its only weapon, its only tool for survival was its face. For decades, the scientific community actually heavily debated whether the hell pig was an active, aggressive hunter, or if it was just a giant, opportunistic scavenger that ate whatever it could find dead on the ground. But modern paleontology has painted a picture that is actually much more violent than either of those options. The Daeodon was what we call an apex bully. It was essentially the ultimate mob boss of the prehistoric plains. Think about it from a purely energetic standpoint. Hunting takes a massive amount of calories and carries a high risk of injury. So why exhaust yourself hunting when you are the biggest, most terrifying thing in the forest? Instead, the Daeodon simply waited for other, smaller apex predators, like the wolf-sized Entelodon, to do the hard work and make a kill. Once the smaller predators took down an animal, the Daeodon would literally just charge out of the tree line, using its sheer, towering mass and horrifying aggression to chase them away from their own hard-earned meal. It stole food through pure intimidation. But what the Daeodon did to the stolen carcass is what truly makes it a biological anomaly. If you watch a modern carnivore like a lion or a wolf eat, they consume the meat and the organs, but they usually leave the thickest, densest bones behind because their teeth simply cannot break them. The hell pig left absolutely nothing behind. If we look closely at its dental anatomy, it tells a perfect, horrifying story of how it processed food. The front teeth, the incisors, were sharp and pointed, perfectly designed to rip and tear huge chunks of flesh directly off the carcass. But the back teeth, the massive premolars, were entirely different. They were thick, incredibly blunt, and in almost all the adult fossil specimens we find, they are heavily worn down. These back teeth didn't cut meat, they functioned like industrial sledgehammers. Powered by the massive muscles attached to its sagittal crest, the Daeodon could bite down with enough raw biomechanical force to snap a solid femur completely in half. It did this to access the rich, calorie-dense bone marrow trapped inside. A vital food source that literally no other animal in its ecosystem had the jaw strength to reach. But here is where the story of the hell pig goes from fascinating to genuinely unsettling. A predator of this size with a metabolism burning this hot requires a nearly impossible amount of daily calories just to stay alive. And in nature, when the environment shifts or a drought hits and the food runs out, monsters turn on each other. The fossil record pulled from the White River Badlands of North America reveals a very dark reality about how these animals interacted. Paleontologists have uncovered numerous Daeodon and Entelodon skulls that are completely covered in deep, jagged, healed bite marks. We are talking about puncture wounds up to 2 inches deep, driven directly into solid bone, right across their snouts and right between their eyes. And the terrifying part? These wounds didn't come from a different species of predator trying to hunt them. The spacing and the depth of the puncture wounds perfectly matched the teeth of other hell pigs. This proves that they engaged in incredibly brutal face-to-face combat over territory, mating rights, and rotting meat. They would literally lock their massive jaws onto each other's skulls in a violent wrestling match. And remember those weird bony flanges sticking out of their cheeks that we talked about earlier? Scientists now believe that along with anchoring muscle, those cheekbones actually acted as built-in facial armor, designed to physically protect their eyes from being gouged out during these horrific cannibalistic fights. It was a hyper-violent existence, locked in a continuous evolutionary arms race against their own kind. So, if the Entelodons were the absolute undisputed tyrants of the mammalian world for over 20 million years, surviving on sheer intimidation and brute force, what happened to them? They seemed biologically unstoppable. Why aren't they roaming the forest today? Well, nature has a very cold, very cruel sense of irony. The Daeodon wasn't killed off by a bigger, scarier monster, and it wasn't wiped out by an asteroid. It was killed by the grass. As the Earth's climate slowly transitioned from the Oligocene into the Miocene epoch, global temperatures began to drop significantly. The dense, heavily forested environments that the hell pig absolutely relied on for cover and ambush hunting began to permanently vanish. They were slowly replaced by vast, wide-open, endless grassy plains. And as the environment changed, the prey animals adapted to survive in it. Herbivores evolved longer legs, lighter bodies, and incredibly fast sprinting speeds to escape threats in the open fields. The Daeodon burdened by its massive top-heavy torso and gigantic heavy skull, simply couldn't keep up anymore. Its biomechanics were perfectly built for short, violent bursts of power in the woods, not for endurance running across the open prairie. And to make matters worse, a brand new type of predator was migrating across the ancient land bridges into North America. They were the amphicyonids, much more commonly known to us as the bear dogs. Compared to the massive hell pig, these new predators were smaller, they were faster, their brains were more advanced, and most importantly, they hunted together in highly coordinated packs. The era of the solitary, brute force bully was officially over. The era of the highly intelligent, coordinated pack hunter had begun. Surrounded by faster prey it couldn't catch, and outcompeted by smarter predators working together, the hell pig found itself obsolete. It couldn't adapt to the new rules of the biological game, and it slowly, quietly starved into total extinction. Today, the only evidence that this absolute anomaly ever walked the earth is found in the crushed, fossilized bones buried deep in the ancient ash of the Badlands. The Daeodon stands as a chilling prehistoric reminder that in the natural world, brute force, aggression, and sheer terror all have an expiration date. Because at the end of the day, evolution does not reward the biggest, and it does not reward the strongest. It rewards the most adaptable. If you made it this far into the video, you are part of a very rare group of people who truly want to understand the dark, hidden mysteries of our planet's past. Hit the subscribe button to officially join Decoder.